Okay, so let's just dive right in. Have you ever thought that maybe, just maybe, we fundamentally misunderstood one of the most powerful spiritual figures in history, and not because we're not smart, but because we've just been taught to see him in only one way?
What if that famous line, "I and the Father are one," wasn't actually about a singular man claiming divinity with some god up in the clouds?
What if it was really a statement about a divine potential, a spark, hidden deep inside every single one of us? This isn't about challenging anyone's faith. It's about looking at it from a completely different and maybe even more powerful angle.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to start with a pretty radical reinterpretation. Then we'll explore Christ as an archetype of wholeness, see how that idea can bridge our own inner divides, and uncover this concept of the God within. And of course, we have to ask why this idea seems so hidden, before finally looking at what real redemption might actually be.
Okay, first up, this radical reinterpretation. We're talking about a huge shift in perspective, moving from an external savior to an inner blueprint. The famous psychiatrist Carl Jung, he looked at the figure of Christ and saw something more than just a historical or religious icon. For him, Christ was a powerful symbol, a kind of psychological map for our own inner transformation.
And right here, you can see the two views side by side. On one side, you've got the traditional view, Jesus as an external savior we worship, but the Jungian view, it flips that completely on its head. It sees Christ as an inner archetype of what he called the self, a potential that has to be realized inside of us. Jung's whole point was that when we place divinity entirely outside ourselves, we kind of cut ourselves off from our own deep inner wisdom. And listen, this isn't some brand new idea. This quote from the Gospel of Thomas, which is an ancient Gnostic text, says the exact same thing. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. It's suggesting salvation isn't a handout from someone else. It's an awakening that comes from deep within. And that is what Jung was so fascinated by. So, how does this inner blueprint actually work? Well, that brings us right to our second point, the archetype of wholeness. This is really the blueprint for becoming your true self, and it's at the absolute core of Jung's psychology.
The central process in Jung's work is something he called individuation. You can think of it as the ultimate personal journey. It's the process of taking all the different parts of you, the parts you show the world, and the parts you hide in the shadows of your unconscious, and integrating them into one whole person. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be.
And the goal of that whole journey? It's what Jung called the self, and he always used a capital S. This isn't your ego, it's not just your personality. The self is the archetype of total wholeness. It's the complete you. And for Jung, the most powerful symbol our culture has ever produced for this integrated self was Christ.
Just think about it for a second. Christ's dual nature, fully human yet fully divine. For Jung, this wasn't just some theological puzzle, it was pure psychological genius. It perfectly symbolizes the tension of opposites that every single one of us feels inside. Spirit and flesh, conscious and unconscious, the saint and the sinner. He represents the incredible possibility of bringing all those warring parts together into a unified whole. And that tension, that inner conflict, brings us right to section 3, bridging the inner divide. Jung saw a kind of psychology of the cross. He believed that a lot of our modern suffering comes from this massive split between our little ego, who we think we are, and our much larger self, our total being.
So, from this perspective, the crucifixion becomes more than just a historical event. It becomes a stunning psychological metaphor. It represents that painful but absolutely necessary process where our limited little ego gets stretched to its breaking point, so that something bigger, a more whole consciousness, the self, can be born. It's really the death of the small self to make room for the true self. So then, when we hear a line like, "No one comes to the Father but through me," the Jungian way of seeing it isn't about some exclusive VIP pass to God, it's a psychological truth. It means no one achieves that inner wholeness, that connection to the source, except by going through the process of integrating that Christ archetype, that bridge to the self that already exists within them.
So what is this Father, this source, that we're all trying to connect with? Well, that question leads us to section 4, the God within. and this idea of reclaiming our own divine spark.
Most of us are taught to think of the Father as, well, a person in heaven, right? But for the early Christian mystics, especially the Gnostics, it was totally different. For them, the Father was the invisible, unknowable source of consciousness itself. It was a divine spark planted inside every soul, something you had to awaken, not just worship from afar. And when you see it that way, wow. That statement, I and the Father are one, just completely transforms. It stops being an exclusive claim of divinity by one person. Instead, it becomes a beautiful description of a peak psychological experience. A moment where the small I of the ego suddenly realizes its deep connection to the infinite self. It's not about becoming God, it's about remembering that a piece of God has been in you all along.
But that brings up a really big question, doesn't it? If this idea is so deeply empowering, why on earth isn't it the main story we're told? Well, that takes us to Section 5, why this idea is hidden and the shadow of the institution.
If you look at it from a psychological angle, it really comes down to power and control. A spiritual path that's all about inner discovery, well, that makes each individual their own spiritual authority. And that can be a real threat to any system that's built on you needing an intermediary, a priest, a church, to connect you to the divine. It's just simpler to centralize authority and keep the structure intact. Jung had a great word for this, projection. He said that when we take our own inner divinity, our own light, and we project it onto an external institution, we do two things. First, we give away our personal power. And second, we create what he called a collective shadow. All the darkness we don't want to face in ourselves gets pushed onto and often acted out by the very institutions we've decided are holy.
And all of this leads us to our final section, where we can tie all these threads together. Section 6, the real redemption, a journey back to wholeness.
And here's the final crucial distinction. You have salvation, which is often framed as an external rescue mission. It's something done to you. But in this Jungian view, redemption is an internal, active journey. It's the process of becoming whole by courageously integrating all the parts of yourself. The good, the bad, all of it. It requires your full, conscious participation.
So if there's one thing to take away, it's this. Redemption isn't really about being saved from something bad. It's about remembering where you came from. It's about becoming whole again. It's the lifelong process of finally welcoming home that divine spark that's been waiting inside you all along. And that leaves us with one final thought, just something to ponder. What would your life actually look like? What might really begin to change if you stopped looking for God somewhere out there and just started listening for that quiet voice that's been whispering from the very center of your own being this whole time?